Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe, follow, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Welcome to another episode of The Girlfriend God. Today, I'm super excited to welcome Yeshe Matthews. She is a Mandala priestess, and here's where I'm going to need your help with pronunciation. Sybil of...
It's Sokyalzamo Dryang Ling, which is the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple.
The Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. Thank you. She's also a Dharma practitioner and a licensed minister, avowed and ordained in several different mystery traditions, including Tibetan Vajrayana. Did I say that one right? Okay. Buddhism, plant and spirit shamanism, Ifa, Mayan cosmology, and goddess spirituality, with a master's degree in women's history from Sarah Lawrence College. She studied women's mysticism and matriarchal communities for over 20 years and teaches the temple's priestess and civil training programs. She co-owns with her beloved husband Albert the Sacred Well, the metaphysical shop where she offers readings, ancestor guide sessions, civil sessions, and more. All of your social media links and various websites, all of that is in the show notes, so the listeners know they can go there and learn more about you, book sessions, work one-on-one, get enrolled in some priestess training, and all the other wonderful things that you offer. So, Yeshe, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And I just was scanning your podcasts, and what a wealth of information you've already created, and
Thank you.
amazing guests. So what a privilege and a pleasure to be invited. Thank you.
It's been a real journey, and it's been fun, and I've met the most interesting and knowledgeable women from all over the world, and it just keeps getting better.
So
I gotta
great.
tell you, when I started it, had no idea what was going to happen, what was going to become of it. My whole motivation was just, I love the goddess, and I want to talk to other people who love the goddess and share goddess spirituality. And from that, here we are in our fourth season of all these wonderful, wonderful women and a couple men. There have been a couple men on the show. There have been two.
Okay, yeah.
So I met you because I enrolled in your Dear Mother class. So I think that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. But as is the nature of this show, I'm certain that we will veer off into other topics. So I had told you in our email correspondence that this is a heavy research focus of mine, and I'm in the process of writing a book, which is sort of a follow-up to Caroline Wise's search for Ellen of the Ways. So before we go all the way back into history, which is really where the Antlered Goddess story begins, back in Neolithic, Paleolithic times, let's start with Caroline Wise and then go backwards, because what I have found is if you look up Ellen of the Ways today, or even if you just look up Antlered Goddess, all roads are going to point to the Mabinogion, Welsh mythology, Celtic mythology, all in that part of the world. How does this happen? Right? I think about this a lot. How does a goddess suddenly appear on the scene and then become popularized? Because there was a time when no one had heard of Ellen of the Ways, and then all of a sudden, there's 8,000 Facebook groups and 6 Etsy shops, and you know what I mean? And I think that's good because all of a sudden people are, nuts about said goddess. But it's also frustrating to me because if you do that Google search for Ellen of the Ways and you read everything that's written about her, there are no citations anywhere. There are no, you know what I mean? So, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like let's see, there's sort of like my brain is firing on two cylinders here.
Hmm.
Let's see. On the one hand, um, I feel like the Celtic, um, European focus on the antlered goddess has a huge, like, kind of underground network of things that came before
Right,
that go further back, and I think further afield. And so then, if you start to kind of dive into some of the Scythian mythos, the Hittite and Hattushan mythos, the Central Asian figures, the figures of Siberia amongst the many different circumpolar peoples. There's this root that starts before we as humanity begin tracking things in a way that could be considered academic.
right,
And so this lack of citations, on the one hand, it's like, well, is it a bug or is it a feature? On the one
right,
hand, it's a bug because for women like you and I who are very like, love to geek out on our info and trace things and read about
right,
them and follow those footnotes, there's kind of like empty space in that. And then on the other hand, I really feel like the Dear Mother gives us this kind of a canvas onto which we can begin to rediscover and recreate our more kind of animalistic proto goddess
right,
worship. So I guess I lament on the one hand the lack of, lots of citations and that kind of thing. And on the other hand, I kind of understand, for example, the figure of Ellen of the Ways as like a locus or a lens through which a number of different but kind of related things have come together.
right.
I think, yeah,
And that's true of any goddess, right? So
yeah,
many of the major goddesses in the world that anyone has heard of are kind of a fusing together of this goddess and this spirit and this deity that came, this demigod that came before.
yeah, this land spirit, this lineage spirit.
Right, right.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm thrilled that the information is out there at all. I'm fond of Caroline's work because it's really what set me on this path. I started with her. I read Ellen Sentier's books, um, which I feel are much more, again, lack of citation, right? Because all of Ellen's work seems to be very much personal gnosis.
Hmm.
Um, but with Caroline's book, I guess was more drawn to that as a previous academic, right? Because she did include footnotes and endnotes, and they did a lot of research into these different ideas that they had, kind of tying it all together. But it was Ellen, or I'm sorry, it was Caroline who I heard on a podcast 2 years ago. She was on Liz Kelly's Home to Her podcast, and she is the one that mentioned the Esther Jacobson book, The Dear Goddess of Ancient Siberia.
Yeah.
And Caroline herself had said that this is what she had come to understand between the writing of her seminal work and now,
Hmm.
that she has learned about this Paleolithic, Neolithic history and its ties to Sami culture and deer mythology throughout the world.
Right.
And that's what's exciting to me. And I also think, I'm guessing that you'll agree with me, that different goddesses show up for us in humanity at the times that we need them,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
and the dear mother, and or Ellen, I call her Ellen just because that's how I came to know her. Plus Ellen means deer in multiple languages around the world.
Hmm.
Um, I know that here in the United States, I mean, reindeer are extinct in the lower 48,
Right.
right? So we
That's
need
right.
her now.
It's almost as if, like, as the global warming is melting the ice and polar permafrost, she's coming to the surface
Right,
in a way and reminding us of a different time when we related differently to nature, to animals, to being part of, where the human herd and the antlered herd, whether it's reindeer, caribou, etc.,
right,
however you elk, but where they were one rather
right,
than separate, and where they were in communion with each other, similarly to how, like, plains people in America will see the bison. There was a time when the bison were so numerous,
right.
voluminous, that they were like a family to the human family. And I think, so partly, so that's one thing that I think. Second thing that I think, particularly about Ellen, is that she fills a role that is necessary for the advancement of um, global indigeneity, a
Right,
reestablishment of global indigeneity, because she is, in fact, the sort of um, pre-colonial. She's a pre-colonial um, figure who's got so much that's shrouded in mystery
right,
that she defies the patriarchal kind of um, desire to put her in a box, label her neatly, put her in a volume, stick her on a shelf. You know what
right.
I mean? So I think she helps, women of European descent, not only, but for many, to rediscover a layer of ourselves where we feel that impulse to the pre-colonial. We feel that impulse to decolonize, and we feel that impulse to have that natural relationship with animals, plants, and
Earth,
in a non-appropriative way.
right,
Because I, we don't know each other very well yet, but I'm just going to venture out on a limb to think you might understand where I'm coming from here. Like, the number of white American women who want to closely identify with white buffalo calf women. And it's not because they're bad people. And it's not
right,
because they're horrible people.
right,
It's because they feel like they want to have an identification with this kind of powerful animal. She's the mother, but she's the lover. She's free, she's wild, she's untamed and untamable, and she's also a healer, a bringer of goodness.
right,
Um, there's no reason that anyone should not want to have that
right,
connection as a goddess practitioner. It's just that I think for a lot of women, especially white women in America, there's a sort of a sense of, like, not knowing where we are indigenous
right,
and feeling that loss and feeling like there's so much that's happened with our ancestors that's beyond our control and we can't change it now. And so we're just muddling along here trying to, but I think Ellen and her and the figure of the dear mother, even just more generally,
right,
gives a place for that to go. And as long as it's being, as long as it's respectful and everyone's, doing the best to balance between their research and their personal gnosis, and,
right,
not just like go in there and act like, oh, whatever, I'm the queen of Avalon from, you know, Tennessee going here for my first time, but I'm somehow the queen of it, like we
right,
kind of have to go with some respect, even
right,
to the lands where we are indigenous. But when we do that, the potential to connect something that has been lost and thus begin what I think is a de-escalation of the colonial paradigm within the divine feminine collective
Right,
unconscious is really powerful. So totally worth doing
right.
when we can't find them, all the citations, you know.
So do you think, again, I think I know what your answer is going to be. Is the but yeah, you're right. We don't know each other that well, so I could be totally off base. Is the dear mother a symbol of matriarchy? Something that I learned in your class that I had not known previously was that reindeer herds are led by a pregnant female.
That's
I
right.
didn't know that.
Yeah, actually, that's, my entry into the Dear Mother was not through Ellen. So for me, I started working with this construct, the Dear Mother, kind of archetypal. I had a vision, and I did a journey with a woman who was doing some drumming for me to go and make a connection with a goddess that had appeared to me in a dream. So she had come in a dream, and it was kind of like this, like, come find me, and I wanted
That's
to,
funny. I get that message from her often.
yeah,
Come find
come
me
find me,
or come
you
look
know,
for me.
come look for me. And so
Yeah.
I had been like, well, okay. So I had a friend who I knew had done some training in shamanism
Hmm.
come, and she drummed for me. And it was really interesting. She had called me the day of the journey, and she said, bear, deer, or horse. And I said, horse. And then I immediately regretted it. And I was like, oh, I should have said deer. But what she was actually asking was which type of drum should she bring? Because she had drums in those three hides. And so she brought the horse skin drum, which is an interesting, like, oval shaped drum based on the shape of the hide. And she started to drum, and and immediately this horse appeared wearing a mask,
Mm.
a full, like, regalia with antlers and like hair and features, and it was really elaborate, and took me on a journey, and I went into this grassy area, like high grassland type area, and there was a kind of like a yurt, not exactly a yurt. It had a smoke hole up the middle like a yurt does. And I walked inside, and there was a woman, and her face was changing. She was like old, she was young, she was light skinned, she was dark skinned, she had blonde hair, she had gray hair, she had black hair, she had wide eyes, everything. Her face just kept morphing. And she was like writing something in this book and laughing. And kind of I came back from it, and I was like, that does not really help, but it does a little in a way, but not really in another way. So then, as I journeyed onward with my research, and this took me probably about 3 or 4 years. I think it wasn't until like 2014 or so that I found this reference to um, a Siberian goddess, kind of like border of Siberia, and then also like eastern China, like Xinjiang province area, where you find like the witches of Subeishi and the Tarim Basin mummies in that sort of region. Um, that kind of a climate. So it definitely mapped with that kind of high desert. And then I learned about how the women who would serve as shamans for the community there would often live in some kind of a circular domicile that had a ladder going up so that they could climb up the ladder, and the smoke could go out, and that was kind of how they would commune with the spirits. And then I learned about how in Mongolia there used to be a lot of reindeer, as in the lower 48 and other places all across Europe. There used to be a
Right.
lot of reindeer, but that they
That's why the deer stones are in Mongolia.
exactly,
Right.
exactly, those beautiful deer stones. and that then they're no longer there. And so now when there's certain rituals that require a deer to be present for the ritual, the shaman will get a horse and put a mask on the horse.
Wow.
And then I knew I was kind of onto something. And then furthermore, I started to discover stories of goddesses, who don't have one. And this is something that happens in Central Asia and in East Asia in some cases, and also in some of the Baltic and Slavic regions. There's certain, like, they're not like goddesses like Hera. They're goddesses like household, like more like household deities.
Right, right,
Um, and and particularly like the goddess of women will take the form of whatever woman is worshiping her at the time. So there's not a static look.
right.
So then I felt like, okay, so that was like my intro to all of this. That was sort of where I made my entree. Ellen of the Ways and Celtic mythologies came later as I started to explore, and I actually kind of went and explored like different deer goddesses and deer adjacent goddesses through Central and Southeast and East Asia. So like Tsering Ma in Tibet, who's the head of these sisters who are wild mountain spirits, but then
Right,
they commit themselves to the Dharma and now they protect that particular series of mountains. And Saringma is riding on the back of a deer, or Sarasvati pictured with a deer with
right,
her. So a couple of these different things started to popcorn, right? And I started to see it, and then so that took me back to the work of Ted Andrews, who always said, go and learn as much as you can about the biology of the animal before you go like assigning it fanciful meanings of like it's about
hmm
loyalty and whatever, but instead go observe, like, how does it eat, where does it live, how does it mate, how does the animal exist, what does it do for winter, how does it handle conflicts, is it a predator, is it a prey, blah blah blah. And so then I started down that road, and that's where I started to research, how do reindeer actually operate in a herd
right.
structure? And that's what took me into, and it was the smallest little line item. This was before, like now there's lots of creators out there who have done deer mother related content, like Gather
Mhm.
Victoria did that beautiful video, and there's other content creators who've done, Carolyn's book, other people have created incredible content, but at that time there wasn't like a ton of that content out there.
Right,
And so I found this random note in a biological book about reindeer and their herd behavior that talked about how it was actually a functioning matriarchy. Mind blown. And yeah,
right,
and then all of a sudden it was just like, you know I don't know, it's like The Price is Right. All of a sudden, all the sevens lined up, or all
right,
the
right,
joys lined up. And it was like, oh, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And now we're no longer actually talking about any one single culture. We're
right,
talking about the proto matriarchy. We're
right.
talking about that moment in time. And I saw in your you interviewed my friend Devora, Kohenet Devora.
I love
Um,
Devorah Cran.
Isn't she wonderful? I love her so much. I saw in your recording with her that you had talked a little bit about those Venus figurines and that kind of proto matriarchy. And so,
Right,
hearkening back to like that, I feel like that is where Dear Mother energy is. And even though those figures don't have antlers, I don't know. I feel almost like I'm making my way somehow. I have this sort of plan this year where by the end of the year I'm going to kind of have a more of an argument for like these Venus figures as that version of a woman carving an image of herself to be worshipped,
right,
or of a woman understanding that she was taking on, that she was that form of the goddess, and that so was every other woman, and that
Right.
so also all the ruminants around, and all the predators around, and all the prey animals around, and that this is like a bigger thing. So that's sort of where my work ends up going. So then finding, then from then it's just like also like, oh, and Artemis and Diana and Dalu and Ellen of the Ways, and also all the ones that are like, nah, maybe that's a little tenuous. Like for a
Right.
long time there was
Right. Because there are other.
British was a deer mother, but now like no, maybe no, that's more like a cow goddess, not actually a deer goddess, and things like
Right. That's what I was going to say. There's several different goddesses and different versions of that story, right? For
that.
other goddesses being associated with bulls or elk or bighorn sheep, or you
Right.
know what I mean? Other
Ram.
things with not
Yeah.
necessarily
People in the
antlers,
curling
but
ram part.
horns. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a prevalent theme. And it's so interesting to me when we do this research and how we realize that, all of these things really are global phenomenons. The same stories, the same myths, the same legends, the same, like I've researched a lot of deer mythology, some
Mhm,
reindeer in particular, but
mhm.
just deer in general. And like in the story of the stag and the hunter and or being punished because someone's killed a deer, or like those stories exist in every culture
That's right.
across every time span as
Yes.
well, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like this subtle undercurrent that becomes thunderous once you tap into it. It's something that
Right,
many people could go their whole lives and just not even like think about that
right,
particular vector. But once you get into it, it's actually like you're in it. You're in the deer cyclone,
right, right,
the
right.
hooves are thundering all around you, and you're like, oh my gosh, this was here all along, but I didn't know to look at it. So in
Right.
that way, like I think it is great to see so many people taking interest, and there's a thing I've said before. I feel like there's two Hecates. Well, there's actually three. There's Roman Hecate, there's Greek Hecate, and they're slightly different, and they're each worshipped distinctively, as if they were the same, but they're actually a bit different, similar to Artemis and Diana, are different,
Right.
the same but different. But there's a third Hecate who is the what I call meme Hecate. Meme Hecate is the modern Hecate who everyone assumes is a crone, who everyone kind of paints with that like dark, sexy gothic look. And that's meme Hecate. She doesn't actually have much basis in any of the like literature about
Right.
either Greek or Roman Hecate, except for the
Right.
necromancy part and the keys and torches part. So, but the thing is, 2,000 years from now, will meme Hecate be a real Hecate? Because now
Right.
she's being worshipped as one. So I think in a way, the Dear Mother gives us this similar kind of thing. Like there's always one over, they're all in every culture and all over the world through time. And probably 2,000 years from now, people will be like, oh, and the idea of Ellen of the Ways as described in 8,000 Facebook groups will be canon.
Right. Right.
And as a scholar, sometimes as a historian, sometimes that makes me feel a little anxious, but as a
Right.
culture creator, as a priestess, the priestess creates culture.
Right.
I'm for it,
Right.
right? Because I'm like,
Yeah, I
whatever
mean, I
floats
get
your
that.
boat.
Like I said, like you, as a previous academic, I'm like, cited sources. I don't, where'd you get that information? Have you had that verified? Have you fact
Right.
checked that? Have um, and I think that was just from spending years as a practicing witch and being involved in too many Facebook groups and having had too many disappointing experiences with the practitioners and um,
Raise your hand if you're still in too many Facebook groups.
yeah, not I'm like barely on Facebook anymore. Because I miss what Facebook used to be.
I know, it
And
was
it's
so
just not
fun
that way
in
anymore.
the beginning.
what was I going to tell you? So when I was in Pittsburgh, so I had this experience. I worked with a shaman for the first and only time in my life because it's the only time I lived someplace that those kind of esoteric services were available to me. And shortly before, Ellen didn't come to me in a dream, or maybe she did, and it was in a dream I don't remember. Right? It's also possible.
Mhm.
Because I started having dreams where, like, I would wake up with these kind of random mystery scratches as if I were running through the woods,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right? So I start learning about Ellen and I'm working with this shaman, and I realized that so we lived in this complex where all the apartments were single story townhouses.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in a unit that was only attached to one other unit, and it was the rear facing unit. So we backed up to uh, this natural woodland
Oh,
behind
I
us.
love that.
So there were deer
Yeah.
everywhere. And I mean, the complex had been there a long time. They were very used to people, so they were very bold. I mean, they practically come up and ring your doorbell.
Right.
And people in the complex, we would feed the deer, we'd leave them carrots and potatoes and apples. And I mean, it
You
was
name it.
just they'd be, you'd go out somewhere in the evening and they'd be walking down the street in the complex. I mean, it was magical. We saw babies born every spring. Well, we didn't see
Yeah.
them being born, but saw them shortly
They would
thereafter.
appear. Yeah.
So I'd already had this fascination with the deer. And then when Ellen came into my life, it was like, oh, like maybe that's the whole reason I moved here because Pittsburgh turned out to not be a good move, and then we moved back here to
Mm.
Champaign, Illinois. But I mean, a lot of things happened in Pittsburgh that I think it was necessary for me to go there for those 4 years. But the main one being this discovery um, of Ellen of the Ways, and so I would sit outside at night. I'm a smoker, right? So I would be outside smoking. It's dark, and I hear this very loud noise. And I realized that because there was like a gulch on the other side across the street. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that a deer has run at full speed up the hill of the gulch, across the street, right past me. I mean,
Wow.
right past me. This
Oh,
enormous stag with an enormous rack of antlers bounding up the hill and disappears. And
wow.
after that night, I started to, when I was sitting out there by myself, I could feel it got to the point where I totally expected to open my eyes after meditation and see her come walking out of the woods. She never did, but in a way, she did. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? She just didn't
Yeah.
come as I had envisioned her. But with all these deers and all these fawns and all these female deer,
Yeah.
I mean, it was remarkable. So that's my journey kind of
Oh my gosh.
began
Yeah. And
there.
you know what you just said about Pittsburgh. First of all, I've been to Pittsburgh, so I know how it's urban, but it's got wilderness right up against it.
Right.
And so there is like a lot of wild nature. So to have that in the city must have been such a blessing for the time you were there. And then the second thing is that I think Pittsburgh, with its confluence of three rivers, has a very interesting energy that's always like in flux. It feels
Yes.
like it's a very transformational space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It certainly was for me in many different ways.
and
Um,
that region is overrun with white-tailed deer. I mean,
yes.
Pennsylvania and New York and the New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, lot of deer to the
And
point
the,
where
and
like, you
right.
know,
And the other
some
nice thing was that we had ravens. We don't have ravens here in Illinois, but there were ravens out there. And
mm-hmm.
I learned to tell the difference between them and the crows.
Yeah.
Because because I was told a long time ago by a Native American woman that the raven was my spirit animal, and I have chosen to believe her for all these many years.
Mm, mm,
So that was really special to get to see the ravens, and I would always
yeah.
see them in pairs, which I thought was interesting.
Mm, mm. Well, that's very Odin,
Right, right.
very Odin, who has sent me pairs of ravens in the past, but and usually it's pretty specific. It's like, hello, come pay attention. I've got a thing. I've got
Right, right,
listen, also because I don't really work with a lot of gods in general.
right.
It's just not my work in this world. And so, um, but there are a few
Hmm.
that are like, okay, uh, we need to have a meeting. And then I'm
Right,
like, okay, I'm ready for the meeting.
right,
Like
right.
we have our meeting, and then, but I think it sounds like, that you were there in that transformational landscape and that like it opened something for you to be living in
It
proximity
did.
to deer. And the North American white-tailed deer is actually one of the oldest unchanged, relatively unchanged rangifer species on Earth.
Yes, yes,
So that is like very proto mother, even though they're different than the reindeer, and the reindeer are the ones where the females have antlers. So
right,
that's generally where my devotion is. But I
right,
kind of honor all the deer, like,
right.
wherever you find them. And I think that's another aspect of the deer mother, that like the fact that anywhere you go on earth, you will find some form of deer, whether it's
Yes,
little dick-dicks, whether it's the bison or not, the elk and the caribou, whether it's and reindeer proper, whether it's the white-tailed deer or the other like Javanese deer that have the little teeth, or
right,
like there's a lot, but they're all deer. They all have certain aspects in common.
right.
And
And they're one of the oldest species on the planet,
on the planet,
which is
millions.
remarkable to me.
Yeah. And so that's like, I think in a way that's where we go when we work with these dear goddesses, whichever ones that,
Right,
whether it's Ellen or whether it's Seringma or whether it's unnamed dear goddess of the place where I live,
right,
you
right,
know, I think it's one of the reasons that she's so compelling because she's ubiquitous. I think there are certain
right.
creatures that are like that, like wolves,
Yes,
deer,
bears.
bears, rabbits actually also are like relatively unchanged for millions of years
Right,
and you pretty much ubiquitous. So I think when we start to see like, okay, it's that at some point along the line, humans and these animals actually had communion with each other. This
right,
real relationship. And that the herding cultures that we see now are sort of the vestiges of that, but they're
right,
light vestiges because
right,
it's
right.
for a long period of
Like
time.
I know in Alaska, uh, there are Sami descendants that don't practice reindeer herding, but they practice Sami culture, which
Right,
is all derived from the reindeer herding culture that
right.
that came before them. So, so I'm made it my mission to try and go to Alaska. My age and my health and my funds are dwindling, but I really,
Oh,
really want to go to Alaska.
oh my gosh, I'm gonna hold that for you to get to do that. That would be so amazing.
Yeah, if I could go, if I never go anywhere else, I
We
would
all
really
have
like
our
to go
things
there.
like that are like, before I die, I want to go have this experience.
I would like to do that. I would also really like to go to the Glastonbury Goddess Conference.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and you never know. I mean, I've made all these connections and I'm going to be teaching a few classes next year, and you
Yeah,
never know. Maybe somebody invites me to a conference,
that's right.
right? To be a
Set it
speaker
in
or
your
a
mind.
panelist or whatever.
That's right. Set it in your mind that
Right.
it could work out, and I firmly follow I firmly follow this, and It means it's a big trust. One life is one long trust fall, but I firmly believe that what the goddess wants, the goddess pays for. And that if I just lay it in front of her
I
and it's meant to be, and it's going to further my service to humanity, it's going to further my knowledge that it's
right,
going to happen. And then I just trust the process. And,
right.
the times it works out are more frequent than the times it doesn't.
Right. That has been my experience as well. I mean, I have, I mean, you've heard my show. I'm a very spiritual person. I spend a lot of time in prayer and meditation, and I
Yeah.
have probably more faith today than I've ever had,
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of the experiences that I brought out of Pittsburgh was that my wife and I combined made more money than we've ever made in our lives. And money really doesn't buy happiness. It certainly makes some things more convenient, but that was one of the lessons I learned out there because we had it made. I mean, we don't have kids. You know what I mean? We were
Yeah.
both working full time. If
This
we
is
wanted something, we bought it. If we wanted to take a trip, we went, but we were miserable.
This is such actually what you're saying is such a dear mother kind of a concept where it's like, the worship of the dear mother roots itself in cultures where nothing is wasted,
Right,
where subsistence is the goal. It's not like acquisition is not the goal. Let's put it that way. It's not,
right,
I think sometimes I have a student who just was sending me this thing, it sent me a comment yesterday. She's in Mexico, and recently a white woman reached out and, is kind of like, oh, I'd like you to explain your culture to me. And, um, so my student was kind of like, how do I explain to this person that like everything you've been taught about Mexico is wrong, basically?
right,
Like, you think we're out here like drinking dirty water out of rivers, and that you're like gonna get taken down by a cartel and da 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 da. And it's like, but actually, if you come like to Mexico and you come to the big cities, there's culture, there's a whole financial world, there's all of the things that you have
right,
everywhere else. And I think that you know our society has designed our focus, has directed our focus in this country in such a way that we are taught that you have to have bigger and more and acquisition and
oh
growth.
yeah,
And then you look to these cultures, and the fact that subsistence does not mean rudimentary, everyone's scraggling around and
right,
starving and struggling, and but that subsistence actually means that we live really well within a set of means that
right,
doesn't take a bite more than we need out of the
right,
planet, is really powerful. And learning to sort of to say, like, as part of our decolonial mission, right, is I want to align myself with having enough, just enough to do what I need to do to
right,
accomplish the goals that I have, to be of service to humanity and the earth, the goddess, but also that I'm not on that treadmill endless ramping,
right, right,
endless acquisition. And what a profound lesson for you to be like, wow, no matter how much money we have, no matter what conveniences we have, the fact of the matter is I'm happiest when I'm just standing out there at night smoking my cigarette and the deer comes along, or
right,
whatever. And that's something money can't buy.
right. So I wanted to tell you about one other experience that I had with, I did an ancestral healing journey with Robin Watt, who I had on the show in either the first or second season. Um, and the name of her organization is escaping me. Earth Grove, Sacred Grove, something I don't remember. I feel badly that I don't remember, but I don't remember. Anyway, so we met on Zoom, and it was kind of like journeying, right? I mean, she took me through a guided meditation, and took me to a place, and she had drumming on in the background, and um, took me on this ancestral healing journey. And at one point, she has you cross a river. And then when you get to the other side of the river, you describe the landscape that you're standing on. And so when we got to that place in the journey, the landscape that I was on was the frozen tundra of Siberia. I knew that instantly. I knew it in my heart. Um, and a woman came up to me and she said, "My name is Elena Alistrova, and I have been waiting for you." And I knew that she was an ancestor, right? But then I could hear all of these, I couldn't see them. They were like far back in the tundra, but I heard all of these other women echoing what she said and saying, "We have been waiting for you." And there were hundreds of them. And then, Elena starts introducing me, and I quickly realized that all of the women are named some derivative of that.
Oh,
Elena, Elena, Elaine, Ellen, Elin. I mean, it just went on and on. And that was not that long after I learned that just how many languages um, that Ellen translates to deer, or some derivative of Ellen, right? Same thing. Ellen, Jellen, Olin,
mhm.
Yellen translates into the word deer, and it was just phenomenal.
Oh,
And the other thing that happened to me was, so from my very first discovery of this deer goddess as Ellen of the Ways, one of the things you don't see about her online, or maybe you do now, I haven't like just Googled Ellen of the Ways in quite some time, but you know, if you look up any goddess, there's always a list of pages telling you this stone, this flower, this color, this day of the week, whatever is associated with that goddess. And that didn't
mhm.
exist for Ellen of the Ways. Like I said, maybe it does now. Maybe somebody made it up,
Right. No,
because
I
it's not
haven't
like
seen.
that's in the literature anywhere, right?
Right.
But for whatever reason, I have always associated, I immediately associated green malachite with Ellen. Probably
Hmm.
just because it's a deep green and it reminds me of the forest, and I consider her a forest goddess.
Mm.
Um, and in this patch of woods that was right outside my house. So for like 2 years, I'm just convinced that this stone has something to do with this deer goddess, even though I haven't read anything. I have no confirmation of that whatsoever.
Hmm.
So around the time that I'm researching my ancestry to see if I can find a link between me and Siberia and Eastern Russia and that whole area of the world, which I have partially, but mostly that's personal gnosis and intuition. Just like in that journey when I knew that Siberia was where I was, I didn't need anybody to tell me that.
Hmm.
Um, this voice in my head one day says, "See where green malachite is in the world." And do you know where the largest deposits of malachite are in the world?
Where?
By the Ural Mountains in Russia.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. Uh-huh.
So there you go. You know what I mean? And
That's
it, and
right.
and I'm sure the same is true for you, right? Over time, I've learned to trust my own personal gnosis and intuition
Yes.
because I've had experiences like that where it bears out to be based
Yes.
on something that I knew internally, or that's in my bloodline or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and someday, I have somebody on the show this season named Dia, and it's about ancestral dreaming. And she was telling me that there is now a way, at least in certain circles, to, in your citation notes, to cite your dreams as sources of information. So hopefully that's a trend in the blending of academia and the spirituality, that they will then allow us to cite our own dreams and visions and personal gnosis. And I want to live in that world. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I would easily slide back into academia if that became a reality.
Yeah, I think, wow. I mean, how powerful. And
Because why shouldn't we?
indeed, well, and again, like this is part of if we want to basically like re-indigenize this planet and figure out like how to do that, we do need to step out of those, paradigms that would limit the sharing of ancestral knowledge.
Right.
And so how interesting, because I know there's already ways to cite like oral history and or
Mhm.
interviews and stuff like that, but this is like the next level of that.
And
And where,
I've seen examples of citing someone who channeled
Mhm.
information.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow, fascinating. Well, I
Yeah.
think that sounds like that was a really powerful that kind of chorus of women and all the different names and kind of the sense that you were part of this larger energetic
Right.
collective is I has definitely been resonant with my experience of the dear mother as well. It's very much herd mentality. And
Right.
actually, if we want to get into it a little, scratch a little surface here
Huh?
about this. Um, One of the things that I've researched a little bit and, have ongoing is looking at Neanderthal settlements and how the Neanderthals lived.
Mhm.
And it's my opinion, based on what I've read and seen, that they didn't have a concept of I. They had a concept of we. And so you don't see in the way that Neanderthals like live, you don't see a lot of behavior that is like purely self-serving. For example, there's ample evidence that they helped people with disabilities and didn't just leave them to die. Or if a child was sick and didn't live, that child was loved and honored. And other aspects of how they organize their society lead me to believe that Neanderthals didn't necessarily have singular identities, that they didn't think of themselves as a separate self. They
Right.
thought of themselves as part of a larger thing. And I actually think that herd animal instinct of I'm part of something that's larger is the fundamental aspect of matriarchy. I think it's the fundamental condition of matriarchy.
I agree.
So when I consider that in light of like dreams like this that you just described, or of other things like I've had happen where sometimes when I'm singing, I can hear them singing with me. Um, that sense of collectivity is the fundamental matriarchal principle that unites the herds of deer with human women, humans in terms of this thing only works when we're a we.
Right. So do you think that we are headed toward that again? Because a lot of predictions that I have heard, both based on esoteric knowledge or personal gnosis or astrology, or
Astrology.
I mean, I hear that a lot, that we are on the precipice of moving out of that separation consciousness that we've had for at least the last 2000 years, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
It's one of the
I,
fundamental tenets of belief around the age of Aquarius, which is
right,
fully rolling now, and I think also, when people say, well, this is the rise of the divine feminine, I don't know if I would say it like that. I don't think that's how I would say it. I think it's the rise of mother culture. And
right,
that's different than the divine feminine. The divine feminine is a little bit of a tricky term for me. Sometimes it's like, well, if we talk about the divine feminine, the risk of someone basically putting that on a pedestal and then worshiping and idolizing it, but seeing it as separate and not, and seeing it as like, as we sort of collectively see religion today, where like religion is something that is separate from what the rest of the world is doing. It sets you apart. It makes you special. We're the chosen ones. We're the this, that, and the other thing. Like, I think that mother culture is a better way to describe it, where it's like a world that is safe and good for mothers with children is safe and
Right.
good for everyone. It's just that simple. Like, if mothers can nourish their children and keep them alive, and all of us are making sure that happens in a gentle, loving way, and that, then it's safe for everyone.
Right.
Everyone does well in that. And so, you know, when we think of that term matriarchy, a lot of times people will think, oh, matriarchy is just like the opposite of patriarchy, but it's just like
I've been
replace.
saying, I have been saying the exact same thing in every episode this season.
Yeah,
That we have to start talking about the matriarchy for what it is,
what it really is.
which is an egalitarian society, not just the opposite of the patriarchy. Because
And
you're
it's
right, that is if 9 out of 10 people, if you say the word matriarchy, they think that it's like it is in Barbie Land, and
right.
you
They
know what
think
I
it's
mean, in the Barbie
patriarchy, but
movie,
with
and
women in
it's
charge.
not, and it's not.
But if you
It's
look
the
at
Barbie movie at the end when they all come together.
I haven't seen the movie yet, but I,
Wow.
in the future, I'll see it.
You have to see it. Everybody needs to see it.
Is it
It's so
good? I have seen,
heavy-handed, but it's
I've
so
seen
good.
mixed reviews, but a lot of people said it was really fun.
It
But
is.
in reindeer herds, that is the fundamental basic structure. If a
Right.
predator is coming, they form a circle. They put the
Right.
youngest at the center. They put the most vulnerable at the center.
Yep.
This has huge implications for not only children and women and traditionally marginalized peoples, people with disabilities, people of part of vulnerable populations. This is tremendous implications. So do I think it's coming? I hope it's coming, right? I hope it's coming. Astrologically, it looks like it's coming. It's a collectivity is a central tenet of the age of Aquarius. We may not see its full expression in this lifetime in these bodies, but I think we'll come back for the next act. I
I
think,
do too.
you
And
know, but do I think that it's what we need to survive? Yes. And,
oh, absolutely.
you know, um, yeah, I had a friend who said once, in the event of a major global collapse, the world will revert to matriarchy within 10 days. I like the boldness of that statement.
Yeah,
I
I think
like
it's true.
I like that that statement is bold and presumes that we will in fact remember how to do that. That
Right.
there's something in us that is inherent that knows how to do that. I love the thought of that.
And
That
I think there's something inherent in us also that understands that we are a collective.
yeah, I do too.
And we have a collective consciousness, and we have a
I
collective agenda, and we have a collective, we have collective fear. Like, you know what I mean? And
yes.
I do think that we are on the precipice, because it just a quick look around at the state of things. You know what I mean? Systems that have been in place my whole life, your whole life, are failing.
Yeah.
Patriarchy is failing.
Yes.
Capitalism is failing. Government is failing. All of these systems
Yeah.
are starting to crumble, which is frightening, but also necessary,
I
right?
guess it's frightening if you've come to believe in or hold a certain um, thread of the certainty of those things, which again,
Right.
I completely understand. People do. They do hold that certainty. But I kind of feel like, well, there's a greater certainty to which we all report, which is summer sun, winter snow, needing to
Right.
gather while you can, protecting yourself, protecting those you love. I think that I think that the rise of mother culture comes with people's awareness of that.
Right.
That it's like, exactly, it's like, we don't really have to be afraid of these things falling. The truth is, they've always fallen. For
Right.
all of recorded history, all of that has always fallen.
Right.
Every empire falls. But gosh, the reindeer are still cycloning year after year and still
Right.
herding north year out, and south year after year to their calving grounds. Year after year, there are certain aspects that are unchanged. We will have certain as humanity, and I'm not like a primitivist, as in like we should all just be like living in huts, like, although I kind of do think that to a certain degree. I also think, mm, it's also never actually fully only been like that either.
Right.
There's always been like ways in which subsistence was happening. But I do feel that if we remember that as these things crumble, these things rise, and that we're good at them, and that we
Right.
already know how to do them, and that we not only are already born with it in us, but that we have the animal populations to look to, the reindeer populations, the deer, the bear populations, the wolves. We have these populations to look to for how they survive in an environment. And honestly, the easiest thing to do is just to kind of follow along and do what they do.
Right. Right.
So it's not, I think it is scary, but it's like we're scaring ourselves because what we're afraid of, we're scared, maybe we're scared because we chose to rely on or believe in, or we've never known anything other than these systems. But
Right.
I'll say, over the past 7 or 8 years, I've been systemically devolving from like, my husband and I are down to like we're a one car. We have a home that used to be heated, with gas, because we live in the middle of nowhere. Now we just heat with wood. We are stepping back more and more our reliance on the things of patriarchy, the things that are provided by patriarchy, and moving more in the direction of cultivating our ability to subsist, and also cultivating our thoughts and our ideas about, I think this is like a whole other aspect of the Dear Mother Rising, is like hashtag van life. All these people who are like living as
Right.
nomads out there, and doing so because in many cases they can't afford to do anything else. B,
Right.
for others, they're like, I'm choosing that because I don't want to saddle myself with debt. Da 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 da. For seniors who are like, these are my golden years and I want to be on the road and I want to have adventures and I want to have fun, and I also, don't have any kids and I don't have anyone to take care of me, and so I'm just gonna like be bond with these other folks. Like, we are seeing more of that, and I
Right.
actually feel like that is the modern nomadism. It may not
Right.
be the most sustainable form of nomadism. It's a patriarchally influenced nomadism. It's a capitalistic influenced nomadism. Nonetheless, they're doing it without even knowing they're doing, you know what I mean? They're doing
Uh,
it. People are
Right.
doing it without knowing that they're actually maybe answering like a greater call that's
Right.
more societal, that says, if you move around a little, you give the earth a chance to heal.
Right.
So reconciling what we've been taught with what we deeply know and can observe in nature, I think is our main project in terms of restoring indigeneity to the planet, decolonizing, resisting the patriarchy, resisting the hierarchy, and embracing matriarchy, which is like, we all do well when we all do well. That's really the
Right.
fundamental message of matriarchy. We all
Right.
do well when we all do well. Everyone deserves to be part of that. So,
Okay. I think it's probably about that time. Um, is there anything that you want to talk about that you didn't get to talk about?
oh gosh, well, I will say this, a part of my personal approach to my studies is, like we were talking about before, to go to places, to see places if I can get there, and of course, like as we get older and funds and everything like that. But when I can, I do. And so I would just say for anybody listening to this who's interested in um, cultivating that relationship with the deer mother, if you can, go out and spend time in places where you can see them, observe them, maybe interact with them or not, either way. And also to just really think about how that how there is a culture within the reindeer population that we can emulate wherever we are, just the same way as there's, and it may all look a little different, because just the same way as there's dozens of different types of deer, but they're all deer. And we
Right.
have that too, where we can have different iterations of it. And at the same time, it's all going to kind of come from how we interact regionally. So that would be like just my main takeaway with the deer mother is, yes, read the myths, yes, track down the histories, yes, go visit the places if you can, and then also to allow that inner wild to be your guide, because there's such a nascent intelligence that remains largely untapped for many of us.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, where we live, if we drive outside town for 20 or 30 miles, we're in the cornfields and there are deer everywhere. There's
Right.
deer in our park preserves, there's deer everywhere. I'm fortunate to live somewhere that has, even though they're extinct down here, there is a domesticated reindeer farm
Oh
in
yes.
Rancho, which is only about 20 minutes from here. So
Yeah, I think I
they're
might
only
follow.
open in the winter and it's a big tourist attraction over the holidays, of course.
Right.
But I at least get to go see actual reindeer, which is always
Actual
very
reindeer.
exciting.
And
And you
wouldn't
get
it
to
be
and you get
great?
to feed them and pet them and interact with them. It's a wonderful experience. I was delighted to discover that when I moved here.
Absolutely. You
Like
can go
a
get your
reindeer
reindeer
farm,
fix.
like I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah, I've seen them before. They do exist, and you just like, I dream of a day like when in the future all the things like parks and stuff, it's all like different, and they're just like roaming and they take over again, and the
Yes.
bison are coming and the deer are coming, and
Yes.
I'm for it.
And they have things like that in place, right? I mean, there
Yeah,
are breeding programs by the
right.
conservation department and yeah,
Yeah, and like the reintroduction, the deliberate reintroduction of the Cairngorm herd in Scotland
yep,
and other places where they are reintroducing reindeer, just like in some places where they're reintroducing wolves and other animals
right,
to try
right.
to bring balance back to the planet. So, well, I've had so much fun talking with you today, Kelly. Thank you so
Me,
much for
me
having
too.
me.
But before I let you go, I got to ask you the three questions that I ask all the guests at the end of the show.
All right, I'm ready.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question one. Tell me something about yourself that other people would be surprised to learn.
Well, let's see. I think um I think people would be surprised to learn that when I was in high school, I was the trainer for the football team. And I can bandage you up, take apart your head pads, your helmet and your shoulder pads, and put them all back together and get you back out on the field in like 10 minutes if you needed me to.
That
So
is
that's
surprising.
a funny, weird thing about me. I
That
actually
is.
love football. And
Okay. Also surprising.
yeah, so
So who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
well, I guess I have to root for the 49ers because
Do you
I,
though?
yeah, I mean, like, everyone here is so excited about it.
Yeah, I don't really particularly care about either team, but I always root for the underdog. So
Yeah, well,
I
there
got to
you
go
go.
with Kansas City. Geographically, it's closer as
It's
well.
closer. Well, then
Yeah,
good. See, then if in a truly egalitarian society, you rooting for Kansas City and me rooting for the 49ers, it balances the whole force.
that's right. That's right. People will thank us. Oh, okay. Current favorite TV series or movie you've seen recently? Because I know some people don't watch TV.
Yeah, I don't watch TV, but Well, I do a little bit. I'll tell you, um, I started recently rewatching season 1 of Northern Exposure, which
I
was
loved
a
that show.
show that was really popular when we were younger. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting to note what has aged really well in that show and what
Mhm.
hasn't. It's a show that has a lot of really cringy, very racist sort of language
Mm.
that's sprinkled through it from the episode 1 that I think at the time reflects the zeitgeist of like what was permissible to say on TV.
Mhm.
But the interesting after effect that it has watching it now all these years later is recognizing how in the show um everybody's sort of stereotyping everybody, and
Mhm.
that's what leads to some of the comedic problems.
Right.
And I thought, oh gosh, if that part was dusted off and brought to a little bit more focus, it would still be just as relevant today. And so I don't have like a lot of things that I watch, but I did recently just feel like I missed that show and I went looking for it and I found it. So I'm a couple episodes in, and of course you have to love a show that has a moose in the credits with the antlers.
Yes. Yes. Agreed.
Hmm.
Okay. And then the final question is if your life were a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack?
Huh. Well, I think that gosh, I'm like got a cascade of
I
like
know
three
it's hard.
songs that I'm like, oh, but which if I were to pick one, I guess I would have to say Andrea True Connection. More, more, more. How do you like it? How do you like it? I think
That's a fabulous answer.
that song, as I have such a like real lust for life and growth and knowledge and learning and having adventures and do stuff. And I'm a Taurus, and so whether it's chocolate cake or going on adventures, I think I always like have that yearning and hunger for
Right.
more. So
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't. I think we're supposed to have it all.
I
All of
think
us.
all of us are so, yes, exactly. Why wouldn't
Yes,
we want everyone to have it all when especially there's more than enough?
that's right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Such a good
Thank you
time.
so much for coming on the show. I was so excited to do this episode. It's going to be one of my favorite episodes of the season. I look forward to its release and re-watching it when it comes out in April, the day before my birthday. Um, I will be in touch, but as I always say, until then, I wish you the love and the peace of the dear mother. I usually say of the goddess, but for you, I'm going to say the dear mother.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And same to you with,
Okay,
so much respect and gratitude.
thank you. Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.